Hi, Lou here with part 2 of sequencing and so forth in games. So here we're going to say more about sequencing and also about other ways to change the nature of the game Battlefield. Computer civilization is very well known. In Civilization, or at least the earlier versions, you move everyone you have and then you fight. But the fighting is a primitive sort of combat. One pile fought another, but only the top unit of each pile fought and continued fighting the opponent's top until that one died, and it fought in the next one in line or until the opposing stack was gone. In other words, they kept fighting until one stack was gone and your top one fought until it died, and then the next one below it took over the fighting. Was it a fight to the death? I don't recall for sure, but I think it was. Another method that we see in video games comes from Empire Deluxe and Empire Deluxe Enhanced Edition and so on. One player can move all their pieces one at a time, but all combat is one-on-one during movement and adjudicated immediately. So if your fighter moves onto a bomber, the fight is resolved immediately, and either your fighter dies or the bomber dies, and then you have to move your next piece. Or if you still got movement left, you can continue to move that fighter. So a fighter can actually kill several different pieces in one turn. This relies on the fog of war heavily, as many video war games do. But it limits all fighting to one-on-one, so the use of mass is ignored, which can be quite frustrating. In that respect, it reminds me a little bit of Risk, where the use of mass is quite ignored. So you might have 40 pieces attacking 2 in Risk, but you're still rolling the same dice as if you had 4 pieces attacking. Alternation of move and attack within the same player's turn, that is an obvious extension of this sequencing question. Shenandoah Games had a Battle of the Bulge video game, which started as a tabletop game. You could move up to several pieces. You have up to several pieces per location, and you could move a group. And if that group moved into an area with an opponent, combat immediately resulted. And then you could move your next group, and combat might result from that, and so on. So the combat was separated from and mixed in between the movement. I have some table-type prototypes where I've gone even further than that. In Star Princess, for example, in the battle board, not on the strategic board, everybody sets up one piece at a time, the defender, the attacker, defender, attacker, and so on. Then they fight, shooting one at a time and alternating the shooting. And then they move, again alternating from one player to the other. So that very much keeps players both engaged, because they've got to pay attention and they've got to be ready to fire or to move, as the case may be. Now, if you don't have a computer to keep track, and this is a tabletop prototype, you need to place a marker to show which piece has attacked or moved, depending on which one you're doing. This also tends to encourage one piece per location, but that's not necessary. Now I'm going to describe an evolution of sequencing in 3 games that I've designed. These are simple games, originally just using cards as a substitute for a board as well as units, 1 die for combat. Hastings 1066 is Worthington publishing all these games. All of one side moved, then that side attacked, orthogonally only, not diagonally, adjacent only, and then the surviving opponents counterattacked. So the combat was not simultaneous in that situation. So we've changed now from simultaneous combat to alternating combat in these things I've been talking about. In Stalingrad Besieged, also published by Worthington, all of one side moved, and then the units took turns firing. I believe the defender started it. I had to do that partly because the front in Stalingrad is 9 wide instead of 6 wide, and it was just too devastating to let the moving side all move and then shoot first, and then have the survivors of the other side shoot. And it turned out to be more interesting to alternate one by one, even though it takes more time. The decision of who to fire and when is important, and you want players to make important decisions in a game. Both those games are still in print. The next game will be Battlestone. And now this requires more than one piece per location owing to the scale. And the questions are, if we're alternating action, how are we going to do it? By group or by piece? It's easier to track by group. Are we separating movement and attacks, or combining it in one action point pot, so that you could decide to move a group, or you could decide to have a group shoot into adjacent and so forth? Are we going to allow 2 actions per piece in a turn, or just 1? And if so, are they going to be able to attack twice, or move twice, or only one of each? But it becomes quite detailed. You can keep the number of pieces down, and this is a game with steps, so when you get the hit the first time, you turn the piece over, and then your weaker step is in there, and if it gets hit, then it's gone. But that should make for quite an intricate arrangement. Now, here's another possibility in sequencing, and that's attacks of opportunity. This is a term I know from RPGs, but it's likely used elsewhere. In an RPG, as a character or monster or unit passes by an opponent during its move, the opponent can choose to take a free, quote-unquote, attack on them. Sometimes this counts as their normal attack. Sometimes it really is an extra attack. When it counts as a normal attack, it's the timing and the target that counts as free. So this is quite different from Avalon Hill's zones of control around pieces that stopped enemy movement, but didn't involve an attack, an immediate attack. Of course, the ultimate sequencing is simultaneous adjudication or real time. They're two different, somewhat different things. Video games are often simultaneous and often real time, where things just keep going all the time. There's never a pause in the action. Now you can have something like XCOM 2, where you give orders and then the adjudication of your orders takes place all at once. And then you give orders again to your pieces. So it's not real time per se. Real time doesn't give you time to think. Things are happening constantly. In XCOM 2 and other games like it, you have time to think. Simultaneous adjudication in general allows for thinking, talking in between moves. Now another way to modify all this is to have support or action at a distance. Diplomacy not only has simultaneous movement, it has the support command. There's only one piece per area in diplomacy, but units in adjacent areas can support an attacker going into the area or can support a unit defending the area. Another implementation of this would be artillery firing into distant locations, or even air support. Some people have suggested something like this for Britannia, and I may implement it in Sengoku Jidai. After the mover goes into an area for attack, adjacent area defenders can come to help the defenders in the attacked area, and presumably as long as those would-be helpers are not themselves attacked. But I've never tried it in Britannia. It's a little too radical for that, but in another game it might work. Then I feel necessary, because it's so important, to talk briefly about pure avatar games. Role-playing games are the primary avatar games on the tabletop, but they have strongly influenced many, many video game genres such as RPGs, action, survival horror, and others that all use an avatar. AAA list video games are usually avatar games these days. With a pure avatar, everything a player does, everything that happens to them, goes through the avatar, and the avatar is at risk of dying, which could be losing, but of course in video games usually you just respawn. Now block games are worth talking about too. They descend from, I'll butcher this, La Tak, 1909, and a later near copy, Stratego. They're Chinese Stratego-like games as well. And in those games, you have a piece, and you can see, you, the player who owns the piece, can see the strength and identity of the piece, but the opponent cannot. Now, a recent development of this, which I've used in a couple of games, is enabling two units to move, of certain types to move at once and letting them combine their strength. This is implemented in Doomstar, which is a 2016 Steam video game, and in Pacific Convoy, which is a prototype that's been accepted but not published. There is no immobile flag. Instead, there's a headquarters ship or no flag-like objective, like in Pacific Convoy. The objective is to get a transport ship through to the other side of the board. Of course, there are a slew of block games that use dice for combat, sometimes lots of dice, and allow multiple blocks per location, from Columbia Games, GMT, Worthington, and others. I have a couple of prototypes, not yet published, that are strategic rather than traditional tactical for block games, and they are diceless. You can have multiple pieces per location. It's a hex board. You can't move more than 4 pieces per turn, or perhaps a fifth if it's revealed as a leader. In combat, the combined strength comparison determines who wins. There's no dice rolls. It's deterministic. The winner loses the weakest piece they have, and the loser loses the strongest piece. There are many location objectives rather than a flag or headquarters, and it's heavily dominated by maneuver, which is what I wanted. I wanted a block game that was about maneuver and not about combat. Well, of course, this is a simplified view, or we'd have been here for hours. Thanks for listening.